We are back at it. Day 2 coverage of the NFL Draft. He's Chris Fedor. I am Dan Labbe. The Browns introduced their 2 first-round picks today. We are going to get into that a little bit more, kind of get that day-after feeling about the Browns' first round. And, of course, we're going to take you all the way through the second round of the NFL Draft. Browns have a pick in the second, a pick in the third. If you're watching for something, though, it's those 2 picks in the fourth. You wonder if Ray Farmer maybe is thinking about doing something with one of those, combining them with another pick. Maybe using both those picks to move up if there's somebody he likes. Receiving targets on the board, if the Browns want them. There's other guys out there, too. Hey, Randy Gregory is still out there. Yep. He has vowed to take revenge on everyone who has passed on him. It's going to be an interesting night. The pace is quicker. There's going to be guys that maybe you haven't heard of for fans out there, but this is where it kind of starts to get, this is where you can find the, I don't know what you want to call them, the meat and potatoes. You know, you tried to get your steak yesterday, and now you're getting the other stuff. Yep. You look back to last year, what the Browns did and what other teams do. They find guys that they can plug into spots, and maybe they aren't going to be stars, but they plug into spots and they fill holes for the next 4 to 5 years.
Sure. I mean, just think about the Browns' second round. They go with Joel Bitonio. A lot of people wanted them to go with a wide receiver, maybe Marquise Lee, Allen Robinson, one of those kinds of guys in round 2 last year. Instead, Ray Farmer goes with the offensive lineman. He goes with Joel Bitonio. And then, of course, you look at round 3, he decides to get aggressive, and he trades up for Terrence West. So you've got Ray Farmer, a guy who is known for being aggressive, and you've got clear needs for this team. And it goes beyond wide receiver, too, Dan. They're going to need a tight end at some point throughout this weekend. Got to get somebody to replace Jordan Cameron. Of course, I still think a pass rusher is in the conversation. I mocked Shane Ray to the Browns at number 19. They didn't go that direction. They went offensive line. I think pass rusher would make some sense here at number 43. And then inside linebacker as well, somebody to play next to Carlos Dansby, somebody to get in that rotation with Christian Kirksey, Carlos Dansby, and Robertson.
I actually want to get into the comments here. If you're in the comments, if you're watching, jump in the comments, because I saw someone throw out kind of what they would want.
Yep.
Second round, Devin Smith.
Okay.
Third round, Tevin Coleman. What do you think of that?
So I'm not a huge Tevin Coleman guy, and I understand the allure of Tevin Coleman. Trust me. First-team All-American, Doak Walker finalist for the nation's best running back. 5'11", 206. He's a north-south guy. He takes on punishment, even though he only is 5'11". I talked about it last night, Dan. The thing that I liked about Todd Gurley, the thing that I liked about Melvin Gordon, I need somebody who's either going to break tackles or make guys miss in the open field. And when I was watching Tevin Coleman, I didn't see him do any of those things. So I understand the allure. I just don't think he would make a lot of sense from a Browns standpoint. I think Amir Abdullah, if you want to go with a running back, the kid from Nebraska, would make more sense. Maybe even a guy like T.J. Yeldon from Alabama, who was in that committee backfield for the Tide. Those 2 guys, to me, are more appealing than Coleman. But I do think running back should be something that the Browns consider, especially given the fact that they're going to want to run the football this year.
Well, I can tell you one thing that's not happening. The Tennessee Titans will not be making the first pick of the second round. The New York Giants are on the clock. They just made a trade to move into that spot. Of course, you look at what the Giants did yesterday. They went offensive line like so many teams did. They picked Eric Flowers out of Miami, 6'6", 329 pounds. Why would New York move up? Who do they want here?
Well, they could go with an offensive lineman. Another one, they definitely need an offensive guard if Flowers is going to be a tackle. That's a need for the Giants. And I think you could be looking at a defensive end as well. Maybe a guy like Randy Gregory, you mentioned him. He's available. He's a first-round talent that's still out there. Defensive tackle Eddie Goldman from the Florida State Seminoles. He was a first-round talent that is still available here at the top of the second round. Those 2 guys really jump out to me if you're going to go that direction. And then Preston Smith is a defensive end from Mississippi State. He's 6'5", 271. He led the Bulldogs in tackles for loss, Dan. He also led them in sacks. He has drawn comparisons to Justin Tuck. And if you remember, Justin Tuck was a New York Giant for a long time before he moved on to the Oakland Raiders in free agency. So those are some names that maybe the Giants could be considering here.
So the Giants get the 33rd pick, obviously. Tennessee gets the 40th pick, the 108th pick, which is in the 4th round, and the 245th pick, which is in the 7th round. Not something you see a lot, a team getting 3 picks all in the same draft when they move up. A lot of times you see that 3rd pick coming next year. But Tennessee got 3 picks now out of this, and 2 of those picks are in the 4th round or higher.
And they might not be, Dan, the only team that does this, tries to get aggressive, because as we mentioned at the very beginning of this thing, you've got some guys that could have gone in round 1 that are still there at the top of round 2, and that's when you start to see the aggressiveness. Randy Gregory, to me, was a top 10 talent in the draft. Dorial Green-Beckham, the wide receiver from Missouri, a top 25 player in the draft. Eddie Goldman, to me, a top 32 player in the draft. Landon Collins, the hard-hitting safety from Alabama, another guy that was a top 25 player in the draft that is still available here in round 2. Jake Fisher, an offensive tackle from Oregon, somebody that I thought could have snuck into the back half of the 1st round. Maybe Indianapolis would have made some sense. So when you have that kind of talent, Eric Kendricks is another one. An inside linebacker, probably the best coverage linebacker in the draft. When you've got that kind of talent still there in round 2, you start to see some teams get aggressive.
And looking at just what some people are tweeting, Bucky Brooks retweets Colleen Wolfe, who says that Landon Collins could maybe be an option for the Giants. And Bucky Brooks responds, safety is a huge need, and Collins is the best safety in the draft. So maybe that's a direction they go, according to Bucky Brooks.
And what do we know about the Giants? What do we know about the head coach of the Giants, Tom Coughlin?
He loves defense.
Yeah, and he likes to get tough and physical and aggressive. And Collins was the leader of that Alabama defense for the last couple of years. He's a hard hitter, comes to the football with violent intentions.
Although, what has this team done when they've won the Super Bowl? Really well. Gotten after the quarterback.
Oh, yeah.
They did it to Tom Brady. They're one of the only teams that I've seen really be able to regularly rattle and pressure Tom Brady. They just went after him like crazy.
Yep.
Love the pass rush, so let's see what they're doing here. Roger Goodell going to announce the pick here as our 2nd round coverage continues. Again, it's the New York Giants making it. Then Tampa Bay goes back on the clock. The Browns will make the 11th pick in the 2nd round. That's number 43. We'll see who they target. We will talk about that as we move along here in this 2nd round. And of course, we're getting to that moment where the pace quickens, but we also have to wait for celebrities, if you will, team celebrities to read the picks for their team. So some pomp and circumstance in Chicago happening here in this 2nd round as well. We also will, at some point tonight, we'll kind of show you some video from player introductions earlier. Danny Shelton and Cameron Irving were both introduced today at the Browns practice facility in Berea. So we've got some video of that we'll show you a little bit later tonight. And it's going to be, it looks like, Landon Collins, the pick for the Giants.
I think you can make an argument that he was one of the 5 best players still available. And we're talking about, again, somebody who plays the safety spot like he's a linebacker. Not your new age safety necessarily, Dan. A lot of teams are looking for that guy who can play center field. He's got some coverage skills, have him cover some wide receivers every now and then, some tight ends, some running backs out of the backfield. That's not Landon Collins. Now, he did start as a cornerback. He played some free safety. He played some special teams. But this is a guy who plays the safety spot like a linebacker. He's a hitter. He's aggressive. He's going to come up, and he's going to help support the run. And think about the NFC East, Dan. In Washington, it's Alfred Morris. In Philadelphia, it's going to be DeMarco Murray. And, of course, it's going to be Ryan Matthews because of the moves. Dallas ran the ball so well last year with DeMarco Murray. They have that great offensive line. Landon Collins is a guy that's going to help slow down some of those rushing attacks.
And for Browns fans, as is being mentioned in the comments, this hurts the Steelers.
Yes.
That's a guy that they wanted.
Without question, he would have fit the Steelers really, really well. He probably would fit the Ravens really well. I saw some people on Twitter earlier today, Dan, talking about maybe the Browns going for Landon Collins. The Browns have a guy like Landon Collins. It's Dante Whitner, so you don't necessarily need that kind of guy. But when you're thinking about what he brings to the table, think about Dante Whitner.
Yeah, it would have been interesting had he been there for that. That's actually one position where, at safety, just in general, the Browns seem like they're okay, at least for a few years, as long as Dante Whitner has a few years left in the tank, which we'll find out. So we move on now to Tampa Bay. They added Jameis Winston, of course, yesterday with that #1 pick. So now where does Tampa Bay go? Because we all know that defense is okay. That receiving core is really good. That offensive line, I mean, let's just ask Josh McCown about that. Not so good.
I think you've pinpointed it. They could go defensive lineman here just because of the value, but I think they're going to go with an offensive lineman here. I think it would make the most sense. You've invested in Jameis Winston. You've already signed him to a contract. Now, put him in a situation where he can be successful. And right now, behind that Tampa Bay offensive line, Dan, he can't have that much success. He's a big burly guy. He's got subtle movement skills. He's very good when it comes to maneuvering around the pocket, but you want him to be protected. You want him to have an opportunity to throw the ball downfield to Mike Evans, Vincent Jackson, Austin Seferian-Jenkins, the talented tight end. So I'd look at an offensive tackle. Jake Fisher from Oregon, still available, as we mentioned, but Donovan Smith is another guy from Penn State, made all of his starts at left tackle. That's a guy who's tough, physical, rugged. He would be somebody that I'd want protecting my quarterback.
All right, so we will wait and see. Well, the pick is in for Tampa Bay, as we'll see who they pick to try and protect their valuable #1. Listen, when you go get Jameis Winston, you better make sure he stays upright. Again, that's something Browns fans can relate to. Way back in the day, the last time they took a quarterback high in the draft, a guy by the name, of course, of Tim Couch. We can debate how good Tim Couch could have been, but he certainly didn't have much help from the guys in front of him.
Yeah, and there's another guy that could be available here if Tampa Bay wants to go in this direction. TJ Clemmings from Pittsburgh. I had him going in the first round of my mock draft. He's still here in the second round. This is a guy, Dan, who was a defensive lineman. He started his career at Pitt as a defensive lineman, 2 years only as an offensive tackle. So you start to think about, well, what could he be in the future if we get some NFL coaching there?
And Donovan Smith is the pick out of Penn State, 6'6", 338 pounds, the 34th pick in the draft. He goes to Tampa Bay. So they go quarterback in round 1, offensive line in round 2, and now we are on to the Oakland Raiders with the 3rd pick in the 2nd round. Let's start talking about this a little bit because let's look at the guys that Browns fans at least are targeting. I don't know if Ray Farmer is targeting these guys, but Devin Smith, Max Williams, who are the teams in front of the Browns that could snag those guys?
Well, I thought Tennessee was going to be one of those, especially when you're talking about Devin Smith. Tennessee is a team that obviously took Marcus Mariota last night. So when you have a guy like Mariota, you want to give him the weapons. You want to get the offensive line. You want to get the running game. You want to do everything you can to make him successful. So you can take Tennessee out of the equation. I still think Jacksonville lingers there. Took Dante Fowler last night. They did take 2 wide receivers in round 2 last year, but they still have Blake Bortles, a young quarterback. Get him as many weapons as possible. I wouldn't rule out the Raiders here taking another wide receiver. Back-to-back picks. The Raiders are goofy, and they really only have 1 wide receiver on the roster now with Amari Cooper, who was the first-round pick. So if you're thinking about Devin Smith, those are some teams. And then at number 41, the St. Louis Rams. They've got some other needs. Offensive line is a big need when you draft a guy like Todd Gurley, but the Rams have been searching and searching and searching for wide receivers.
Again, Oakland, they picked Amari Cooper yesterday, as you said. Best receiver in the draft, you've got to think. And, of course, then you had Kevin White, Devontae Parker in that tier right below him. So Oakland got a guy to help their young quarterback in the passing game. Now, again, a bevy of options here for the Raiders.
And you mentioned Max Williams. That's another name that Browns fans have brought up just because of the loss of Jordan Cameron. Completely get it. I think Max Williams is the best tight end in this year's class. The team that you worry about when it comes to Max, though, is that team that's drafting right in front of the Browns. Number 42, the Atlanta Falcons. Tony Gonzalez is no longer there. He wasn't there last year. and they didn't have any production from the tight end spot last year. Because of that, they could be looking for somebody else to boost that offense. Yes, they've got Roddy White, they've got Julio Jones, but they were missing that security blanket for their quarterback.
Adam Schefter tweets, after picking Penn State offensive tackle Donovan Smith in round 2, Bucs head coach Lovie Smith now has had 8 picks in the past 2 years. Not one has been used on defense.
Wow. That's surprising to me. Part of the reason for that might be because they've been going a different route when it comes to defense and free agency. Hasn't really worked out all that well for them, but if you remember, they got that safety banger, Deshaun Goldson. Didn't work out. They went out in free agency, brought in Michael Johnson from the Cincinnati Bengals. That didn't work out either. So it seems like one of the reasons why they didn't go in the draft is because they used all their free agent dollars on that side of the ball.
Yeah, you can only invest so many resources in one area, and they need help. I mean, they still need help all over the board. There's a reason that they had the number 1 pick in the draft this year. So whatever they want to do, they can do, and they have the opportunity to get a franchise quarterback. That helps them a lot as well. Albert Breer tweeting that the Steelers have had talks about moving up, Rams about moving down in the second round. So those are a couple teams, of course, to keep an eye on as we move along here tonight.
Well, the thing about the Steelers, Dan, they're sitting way down there at number 56. They take Bud Dupree in the first round, and I think he was just too tough for Pittsburgh to pass on. There was just too much talent there. But everybody knows, if you watch the Steelers, they need help in the secondary. Troy Polamalu, no longer there. He's retired. Ike Taylor, no longer there. He's retired. There's not a ton of cornerbacks still here on the board, but there are some, and some guys that could have snuck into the late first round. You've got P.J. Williams from Florida State. You've got Darby from Florida State. You've got Jalen Collins from LSU, and a guy that I think would be very, very good for the Steelers. And I know Browns fans don't want to hear this, but Eric Rowe, who played some safety and some cornerback at Utah, he's got the unique coverage skills to take the place of one of those guys in the secondary and just fly around and make plays on the football.
Some folks calling their shots in the comments saying the Raiders will take Randy Gregory. That's a very Raiders-ish pick, at least if you go back to the Al Davis era. But I don't know.
Yeah, I don't think it's going to be Gregory only because they went last year and used a first-round pick on Khalil Mack. I think it's going to be more of a defensive lineman. And there are some of those guys available. I don't think Eddie Goldman makes a lot of sense because he's a defensive tackle. Preston Smith from Mississippi State, he would make some sense to me. And I think the other one is Mario Edwards. Mario Edwards arrived at Florida State, and he was looked at as one of the better defensive players to come to the Seminoles. He never lived up to that hype. He's never maximized his potential, but he had great workouts during the pre-draft process. And he showed why he was one of the top recruits coming out of high school.
And I did just see a tweet from someone, it can't be much longer before some of these Florida State guys start to come off the board here in this second round.
I would think so, yeah.
All right, so we await the Raiders pick, and then the Jaguars go on the clock. Let's peek ahead a little bit to Jacksonville and what they might want to do.
I'm thinking wide receiver makes sense for the Jaguars, but they also need help in the secondary. And Dan, I just think if you look at this second round and you look at guys that are still available, there are more wide receivers right now. Dorial Green-Beckham from Missouri, Devin Smith from Ohio State. You've got Jalen Strong from Arizona State. There are just more of those guys than cornerbacks, in my opinion. So I think because the Jaguars, Dan, have a need for a safety and for a cornerback, I think they should take a guy who can play both. And to me, that's Rowe. And that's why I feel like if the Steelers are talking about a potential trade up, their target might be Eric Rowe, because I don't know how much longer he's going to last.
I'm seeing some talk of Mario Edwards, the pick. That actually is the pick. They go Mario Edwards, do the Oakland Raiders, as Vic Carucci tweets, compliments Khalil Mack nicely.
Mm-hmm. That's what it's about. You got to find guys, Dan, if you're a team like Oakland, that are going to bring skill sets or bring tools to the table that aren't currently on the roster. And Edwards, as I said, he was a ballyhooed prospect going to Florida State. He never really lived up to it. The hype was more than the substance. But now he goes in the second round. That could be motivation for him. And if he doesn't play well, there's a defensive-minded coach there in Jack Del Rio now who's going to kick his butt into gear, that's for sure.
All right, Roberto is Magic gives us an order of preference for his picks. Of course,
Okay.
Roberto, he's a regular in our Browns post-game show and some of our Browns chats. He likes 1, Eddie Goldman, 2, Eli Harold, 3, Devin Smith, 4, Max Williams, 5, Jake Fisher.
All right, so let's go over these. Who's the first one?
Eddie Goldman.
That doesn't make any sense to me. I'm sorry, Roberto is Magic, but you already have a guy who can do the things that Eddie Goldman can do, and you drafted him with the 12th overall pick last night. That's Danny Shelton. Eddie Goldman's the same kind of guy. He's not going to get after the quarterback. He's not going to have the flashy stats. He's a guy who's going to sit there right in the middle of the defensive line. He's going to take on 2 blockers and let everybody else get the flashy stats. So that doesn't make sense.
Number 2 in the Mario Edwards pick becomes official, Eli Harold.
Eli Harold is a guy that would make a ton of sense for this team, because what's the thing missing on this defense, Dan? Speed off the edge, and that's what Harold does. He's got the athleticism, he's got the burst to get after the quarterback, he's a stand-up outside linebacker, and he's got a variety of different pass rushing moves so that he can get after the quarterback. And I continue to go back to something that Ray Farmer always says, Mike Pettin always says. The Browns want to run the ball on offense, they want to be able to stop the run on defense, and Dan, they want to get after the quarterback. So if we're looking at the 3 things that they want to do philosophically, they got 2 of those taken care of last night with an offensive lineman and then a defensive lineman to stop the run. They didn't take care of that pass rusher, so I think pass rusher would make a lot of sense, and I think Harold is one of the better ones still available if you don't want to go with Randy Gregory and all of that baggage.
Number 3 was Devin Smith. Number 4 was Max Williams. We'll skip over those. We've talked about them, and I'm sure we'll talk about them more. Number 5 was Jake Fisher.
Jake Fisher, again, somebody who was a tight end in college, more athletic than he is strong. And I don't know necessarily, Dan, that he would fit this team. I think there are certain teams in the NFL that Fisher would fit well on, but the Browns want to be tough, they want to be physical, they want to pound the football, they play in the AFC North, and I think he would be a little bit out of place because he's not that tough and rugged player. He's more of an athlete with some really good feet to play in like a different kind of offense.
We are awaiting Jacksonville's pick. Pat McManaman tweets a name to remember for the Browns in the 2nd and 3rd round, linebacker Nate Orchard from Utah.
Nate Orchard is a guy who in the Pac-12 gave Andrus Peat. Andrus Peat was the 13th overall pick by the New Orleans Saints last night. Orchard was a guy who got him twice. So, yes, you've got some production there from Orchard. I think he is going to end up going in the mid to late 2nd round. He's that same kind of guy. You need somebody flying off the edge to put pressure on the quarterback, and he can do it.
Jacksonville, of course, yesterday went with Dante Fowler, the linebacker out of Florida. They are now on the clock with the 36th pick. They actually have made the pick. It is T.J. Yeldon out of Alabama, the running back. There's thoughts that there's going to be a little bit of a run on running backs at some point tonight, and T.J. Yeldon is the first to go.
It's funny because so many people talk about Tevin Coleman from Indiana, and they talk about Amir Abdullah. And I understand that Yeldon has some fumbling issues. He's got a history of injuries. He was in a committee backfield. Danny was my 3rd best running back. I love this kid. He reminds me of DeMarco Murray. He can catch the ball out of the backfield. He can turn a 2-yard gain into a 10-yard gain. He glides. He doesn't necessarily run. He's got the upright style. He glides, about 6'1". He's got that tall frame. He was, again, a ballyhooed prospect going to Alabama. And the Jaguars need to run the football. If you've got a young quarterback, the best philosophy is help him out any way you can. Tight end, wide receiver, running back. They decided to bypass the wide receiver because they went 2 in the 2nd round last year. Now they got to find somebody who can run the football. Yeah. And T.J. Yeldon, I like him a lot. I think he can run the ball effectively. I think he's going to be better in the NFL than he was in college.
Wide receiver is going to be fun to watch tonight.
Yes.
Really, just for one reason. Who's going to make the move to get Toriel Green back?
Right.
Who's going to do that? Who's going to take that chance? You got to think it's not going to be the Browns, just because of what happened last year. But who knows? Because they played it safe yesterday.
Yeah.
Who knows? I mean, the bottom line is, if he stays out of trouble, and if let's say he just has a normal college career, he might be the #1 receiver in this class.
Well, here's the other thing that you have to look at when it comes to Green Beckham. Are there issues? Yes, and everybody knows all of those issues. There's a reason why he was booted out of Missouri. But he gets booted out of Missouri. He goes to Oklahoma. He can't play because of the rules. But he didn't get in trouble. You didn't hear anything about Green Beckham getting in trouble at Oklahoma. So that shows some kind of growth. That shows some kind of maturity. He could have gone to Oklahoma, Dan, and not played at all and got himself in trouble and showed that he wasn't a changed person. But all indications are he stayed clean at Oklahoma, and that's a good sign for him. And you mentioned it, Dan. This kid was created in a lab. He's 6'5", 235. He was the #1 prospect coming out of high school. He did great things while he actually played for Missouri before he got himself in trouble. And yes, you can make an argument that a few years from now, if he keeps his head on straight, he's going to be the best wide receiver from this class.
It's interesting. I'm looking at ESPN's position grades here when you get past all the guys that were taken yesterday. It starts with the guys available still. Devin Smith as their #1 guy. Jalen Strong. Dorial Green Beckham is about 5 guys down this list of remaining players. A lot of that you've got to think is based on NFL teams are a little nervous about character issues right now, and rightfully so.
I like Jalen Strong, Dan. I do, from Arizona State. He's going to come down with 50-50 balls, and he's going to help out your quarterback from that perspective. And that's what you want. You want to have a quarterback who's going to throw the ball in traffic and have the belief in a wide receiver that he's going to come down with the ball. Strong comes down with the ball. He's tough. He's physical. Has a hard time getting off the line of scrimmage at times. Doesn't really understand the nuances of the position. As much as I like him, there are lots of guys like Jalen Strong in the NFL. There aren't a lot of guys like Dorial Green Beckham in the NFL. There are a lot of guys like Devin Funches in the NFL. There aren't a lot of guys like DGB. There aren't a lot of guys like Devin Smith. So when you have like rare qualities from a guy, I'll always side with that. Devin Smith has rare speed. He is the best deep threat wide receiver in this year's draft. I'd rather have that than a guy who's going to blend in the NFL.
All right, we are going to take a quick break. When we come back, guess what we're going to talk? Quarterbacks.
Yes.
There's a comment about quarterbacks. That's what we're going to talk about when we come back from this pick. The New York Jets are on the clock. The Browns, we wait for the 43rd pick. We'll be back in a second.